if I remember correctly, when he was touring with Nine Inch Nails, I think he was playing with fingers and no pick, which I don't know how that worked. Like that's crazy to me.
When you hire Pino, you just like you take what Pino gives you.
Yeah. I mean, and you're not going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
Hey Ben. Oh wait, no. Hi Ben.
Hi Carl.
I can't believe I messed up the intro. We're off to a terrible start.
Terrible. Yeah.
But
for lots of reasons.
Make up for it.
Lots of
reasons. It's been a rough morning. But let's go straight into it because I have been thinking a lot about our call from last time. I've been thinking a lot about our episode from last week and talking about all of the different ways that we approach drum production. And it made me realize that we probably have a lot of unique approaches to bass as well. Because, I'm a drummer. And I think about drums in a different way than a bass player does. So it's no surprise that, we had different thoughts and approaches, not even considering the fact that we do very different styles of music. But you're a bassist and I'm a drummer. So I feel like, therefore, we are definitely going to think about bass in a different way. And yes, I am pretending that this was my idea, even though you texted me about 5 minutes ago with this idea. And I was like, damn, that's a good idea.
Don't give away our secrets, Carl. Come on.
But I think my cold brew's kicking in and I'm just like, let's go.
All right. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
And also, if I tee up the episode topic, then I can pass it to you and have you actually start because you're the bass nerd and I want to hear all of your thoughts first.
Okay. What are my thoughts? So we're starting with like recording of bass, production of bass before we get to mixing of bass, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So very simple for me. The sound of the bass is the sound of the bass, meaning you have to choose the right instrument for the bass part. So there's a reason why lots of bass players have a few different basses that they'll go to for different kinds of stuff. I gravitate towards less bright basses. So I'm less of a jazz bass guy, to be honest with you. Don't really like it. Love a P-Bass, love a Music Man. And I love like a hollow body, short scale kind of bass. And that's sort of what I use. And these days I'm mostly using the short scale semi hollow body bass. It's like a cheap violin bass. It's the Epiphone viola bass. But it sounds so fat. And for me, it's all about how I track it. And I pretty much just I think there's something weird with the phase in the bass. I've talked about this before, but like, when I use both pickups, it just kind of makes it sound less bassy and less full. So I actually just use the neck pickup, and it's fatter. And the tone knob, I might dial it back, or I might have it all the way open, depending on what I'm going for. So the secret to the bass tone is the type of bass you're using, the kind of pickup it has, the kind of strings it has. Are you using flatwounds or using roundwounds? And how do you use a pick? Are you using your fingers? Are you slapping? Are you Are you palm muting? These are the things that I think about when I'm looking for bass tone pretty much more than anything else. And then I just like plug it straight in and record. I don't do any fancy miking of amps or anything because I don't find like I need it. We'll get more into that with like the mixing side of things. I have a weird interface. I have this Heritage Audio i73 Pro Edge, which I sort of regret buying. But the preamps are very nice, and it actually sounds amazing on bass. So it's like a 73 style preamp. I know people are more of like into APIs, but I really like the way this sounds. With my Epiphone bass, it sounds fat and gives me what I need. So that's sort of what I'm usually doing. I'm usually using flatwounds, short scale bass into a 73 style pre with my fingers and doing combination of different placements on the bass. I can't stress enough, like bass player, like guitarists, like they'll buy lots of pedal boards, lots of amps, like all kinds of stuff like that. Bass players just like choose the right bass for the song and the sound that you're looking for and play it appropriately. How hard are you digging in? All that kind of stuff. That's where the sauce is. That's how the magic happens. So that's my approach to bass. Choose the right bass, get the right sound with the bass, and go DI, and you'll be golden. So that's pretty much it.
Are you more of a finger player or a pick player? Like, do you feel yourself like going more towards one or the other?
100%. Yeah. I mean, not 100%, right? Like 98% fingerstyle player, 2% pick player. I actually, a song just came out that I mixed. I played pick on. I produced and mixed. I played pick on. And that's like very much the exception to the rule. Like I will do it if it serves the song and it makes sense. But I'm very much way more comfortable with my fingers. And I actually play electric guitar usually with my fingers too, because I've just got used to that.
Yeah.
Dire Straits style, you know, like I'm just used to that. So it gives you a different kind of level of control over the instrument. And I'll use pick on guitar if it's appropriate, and definitely certain kinds of strummings, especially with like acoustic guitar. And it could happen on electric, but we'll get into an electric episode at some point, I think. But yeah, definitely lean much heavier towards fingerstyle. Again, I also slap and I also palm mute and stuff like that. But yeah, finger side for sure, and then generally just regular fingerstyle. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're a very observant listener, you might realize my voice sounds a little bit different right now. And that's because we started this recording, and in Riverside, I had my laptop mic on and not my SM7. So if DX Revive, the awesome plugin we talked about a couple of weeks ago, if that actually does its job and works well, then you might not even notice it.
Yeah.
So we'll see. So anyway,
probably notice a little difference.
Probably notice a little bit, but that's minor. Why. So my bad. Sorry. User error on my part. But the reason that I was asking you about the pick and why I was so interested in your answer is I remember this was, I think, last year. It might have been 2023, I think. But a good buddy of mine, Mitch Beer, he's a bass player, he's a phenomenal bass player. Known him for, probably been playing together on and off for like 15 years, or maybe even longer at this point. But he has been almost exclusively just a finger player, just like you, right? Like, I don't think he ever played pick by choice up until very recently. But then he got a call from a producer friend to play bass on this track for Lil Uzi Vert. And it was Lil Uzi Vert's weird reimagining of Chop Suey by System of a Down. It's weird, but it's like, imagine if you know Lil Uzi Vert, like weird auto-tune, almost like experimental rap, but over a reimagined cover of Chop Suey, but like on his main album that debuted at number 1. It's weird, but Mitch got asked to play bass on it. And if I remember the story correctly, when he was telling me this, he had like 3 days to learn how to play with the pick, basically. Because even though he's been playing bass for like his whole life, it's just like a different set of muscles. And it's like, for me as a drummer,
it changes your feel. It changes your feel.
Totally changes the feel. And I, as a drummer, like I play matched grip, and I've always played matched grip. And if I try to play traditional grip, it does, like my right hand might be doing fine, just like his left hand's doing fine on the neck of the bass. But like I have no idea what the hell I'm doing with traditional grip. So he ended up basically frantically calling his buddy Liam, who's the bass player in Dillinger Escape Plan, and was like, teach me how to play with the pick. So he spent those couple days just like crash course, like learning how to play with the bass, because he did not want to fuck up this gig, because it was, by far like probably the biggest artist that he'd ever been in the studio with. And it ended up being like, his first number 1 and all these things, even though it was like as much of an exception to his normal technique as humanly possible. So it's something where, I find it so interesting that, like you were saying, like choosing the right bass is so important, but like even choosing the right technique and all the different ways that you can play with your fingers, whether you play, even like playing with your thumb versus your pointer finger, is such a huge difference. And I feel like,
and thumb is something I've brought into my playing a lot more in the last like 6 years, let's say, and I do that a lot too. Yeah.
It's something that I've always found so fascinating, because you don't think, like, if you don't play bass, you don't realize how big of a difference that really makes.
Yeah, and then you
know,
got
and
guys like Pino Palladino, right? And he's like playing bass with like his thumb and his index finger, kind of like you would maybe play fingerstyle on a guitar, and that's how
yeah,
he's kind of gets those slinky R&B kind of bass feel that he does.
yeah. And I think
So
he was even playing, if I remember correctly, when he was touring with Nine Inch Nails, I think he was playing with fingers and no pick, which I don't know how that worked. Like that's
yeah,
crazy to me.
when you hire
Yeah.
Pino, you just like you take what Pino gives you.
Yeah, I mean, and you're not going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, so okay, so when you were saying that you don't like any amps or anything, you're just going direct
No.
in.
No.
So I think this is going to be the part where I feel like you and I definitely start to like diverge in our approaches.
Well,
So
I haven't asked you about your recording bass, but yeah, we'll get there.
well, I'm not even going to talk about recording bass because I don't usually track.
Okay.
When I'm doing production, like usually if there's a bass player playing, I'm not engineering it. I'm in like big picture, like arrangement and ideas mode, and I have somebody else handling the nerdy ins and outs of it. So that's why I want to kind of get into more of the post tracking, but like like still in the production, like the editing and the tuning and like the manipulation. And I'm curious, like what your process is for that, because I feel like here's where we're going to go in very different directions.
Mm. Well, I don't know if I could really separate that from mixing. Although, I guess I'll do a little bit more fine tuning, and once I'm in the mixing stage. But like, it's like the bass will be 90% mixed by the time I'm done with, what I'm doing in the box afterwards. And that, there I'm compressing, perhaps EQing, and more often than not using an amp sim. These
While
days,
tracking?
no, not while after I track. Yeah, so I'm very often using the Ampeg SVT. It's also Plug-in Alliance, the bass amp, and I don't always use it. Like it doesn't always work, but when it does work, it works really, really well. It has there's like two settings that at least the version that I have. There's like normal and bright, and so if I want something to be really subby and not so heard, I'll do normal, and if I want something to be a little bit more plucky and heard, then I'll go bright. It's kind of like a two-trick pony, but they both sound really, really good and could work for different kinds of genres. I guess I would usually use the bright version because I usually want to be a little bit more audible in the mid-range. And then, yeah, so it's like, I would say like that's like 6 out of 10 times, maybe 7 out of 10 times I'm doing that. And then, different kinds of compression. So like I might use like an optical compressor or like a VCA style compressor or both. And I have some frequency spots that I like on each bass. So like on the short scale bass, I like to like boost around 700 hertz. That gives it that pluckiness. And on like the Music Man, I'll boost like 1500 hertz, which gives it more like a different kind of pluckiness.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It just sort of depends what I'm going for,
Yeah.
And I might also dip out some like very high bass, low mid frequency, like 250, 300 hertz to get something to sound a little bit less muddy, depending on what I'm going for. And like those are typical things. And then maybe some saturation, maybe some tape, and it's pretty simple,
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised you don't play into the amp sim.
I don't feel like I need to. Like I'm so used to recording direct that like I know what it should sound like and feel like. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is.
No, I was gonna say, because I feel like for myself when I'm doing it, like I need to hear it through the amp, because the different amps, different amp settings, especially with compression, it affects the way that I play. And it affects how it affects especially how hard I dig in versus how much I intentionally stay back. Because like especially with the amp sims, with any kind of saturation or any kind of like grit, like the decay time of the notes and like how aggressive the transient is, like sometimes you really, really need that, and sometimes you need to like play way softer than you realize, because then you can have the sustain stay a lot more consistent and even. So I mean, it makes sense though, because
I sort of think of it like
long.
as like naked as how it is, and then like the amp sim is like an enhancement. I don't think of it as like how am I playing it into this amp. Like when I track guitars, That's different. I need the amp. Like if I'm tracking a guitar part, I'm always using an amp sim. So like
Yeah.
whether it's like the Wong or the THU or whatever, I need to hear how that's responding to the guitar dynamics. But for bass, it's so often like recorded direct, and also like when I perform, honestly on stage, it's like a direct in, right? Like I get a
Yeah.
DI box, and that's it. Almost always when I'm playing bass live. So that's just kind of how I got used to doing it, maybe. And so I know what it should sound like and feel like naked. And then the amp sim is sort of like a extra layer of clothing. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
that's my thought process.
Oh,
And
totally.
it could be a flawed process, but that's what I think about.
Well, I think for this is, where we both knew this is where we were going to start going in opposite directions, because like with the styles of music that you do, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Because it's like the bass part is the main part of this, or like a big part of the story, and you're choosing the amp sims to support that versus a lot of the styles of music that I'm working on, like the more like
Yeah.
pop adjacent, like indie pop, alt pop kind of stuff. It's much more of like a sound design function
Sure.
more than like like the storytelling aspect of it is meant to just like kind of stay out of the way and to support, and it's much
Yeah.
more about like creating like the textures and things. So I think that's why for me, my when I get the DI parts, it's I approach it very differently. Like I usually edit pretty as close tight as I possibly can, and even with tuning, like I'll tune the bass every time and get everything
Wow.
like dead on. Well, because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm also reinforcing it with a synth bass.
Yeah. Like an
So
808 or something.
like either an 808 or like a respace, or or something that is giving those really deep, really consistent bottom end
Sub frequencies.
subs that you
Yeah.
just don't get in a bass. So
Hmm.
because of that, I tend to roll off quite a bit of the bottom in the electric bass, and it's not really like I'm not making the bass play that role, So I love like this the synth bass, the sub bass to play that role, so I can kind of like figure out, okay, well, if that's what the synth bass is doing, if my 808s are handling this, what's all of the untouched landscape that we can now play with the electric bass? So that could be frequency wise, that could be frequency wise, that could be like spatially too. Um, I've One thing I love doing, and I'm working on a mix today actually that I've been doing this, where in the electric bass, it's still pretty clean, the DI that he sent me, but I love, 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 love running the bass through the Corey Wong amp sim. But I turn it into stereo mode, and then before the amp sim, I use the Eventide Quadravox, which is like I think it's like a 4 voice chorus, like a 4 voice like stereo chorus, and I put chorus on the bass, like for this one artist that I'm working with all the time, named Surname. Um, I I played chorus on the bass almost every song. Obviously not literally every song, but for most of them, because it's usually paired with something that's like doubling it, but in like the synth bass range. So I'm able to have it fill up a little bit more space, because sonically and stylistically, there's a lot more like interesting textures happening, because Corey, the artist, Surname,
Not to be confused
he
with Corey Wong, the amp sim.
not
Yeah.
giving you a
Go. Yeah.
different Corey
Yeah.
Crawford. He's
Different
the man.
Corey. Yeah.
He comes from like a photography background, and when I'm working on his songs, I can hear his photography background. I can almost sense like the different elements in the backshot and in the background, and there's always going to be the focal point. There's always going to be something that he is like guiding the eyes to. But when you take a step back and intentionally look around, there's so many interesting textures and things, and that's how I hear his music. And that's why for his stuff, like I'll usually put it through a chorus, and it's just like spreading it out a little bit, adding a little bit of like discomfort to the bass line, even though he's a ridiculously good bass player, and his melodies are so fucking interesting all the time. It's crazy. But it's all because I'm not relying on just that one track to handle the bass parts. It's all the things that usually people say don't do to a bass. It's all usually issues down in the sub range. So if all of the potential side effects of using chorus on the bass or using some weird distortion on the bass or a reverb on the bass, all of those things that usually cause problems, I'm not even allowing those frequencies to be, a part of the conversation on that
Yeah.
instrument. So it allows me to treat it more like a baritone guitar, maybe,
Mm.
than an electric bass, even though it very much has like the tone of an electric bass, but just doesn't have the body and maybe not the body, like the subs and the really low bottom foundational responsibility that the electric bass would have in other styles of music.
Yeah, I totally get that. And also, like, if I'm adding distortion or something funky to a bass track, I probably won't change the original bass track, but I'll add a supplemental track, which will probably be high passed, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, I don't want to put decapitator on the subs of the bass. I'll blend it in on a mid-rangey sort of thing. So I totally get that. And also, like, like recording into like the thing that you're doing for kind of more soundscapey things is totally, I would do that if I'm doing a synth bass also, which it does happen. I mean, usually I'm doing real bass, but like if I am using, whether it's a VST or whatever, or I have a plugin. I mean, I have a pedal board for my bass that sometimes I'll use. Like I have an octave pedal or filter pedal, and so that if I'm doing that, then it'll go in on the way in also. So then it is getting played through that. So that is different than I guess a typical the typical stuff I work on is indie, folk, and pop and rock, and so like that stuff is usually more straight ahead. But if it's not, then I'll adjust accordingly.
Yeah. So one thing I really do have to pay a lot of attention to as well, because I'm blending, an electric bass and a sub bass, synth bass. Obviously, I have to check the phase and make sure that we're not having any weird phasing issues. And I know doing the high pass on the electric bass usually kind of stops those problems before they happen, because I'm not going to notice something drastically cutting out at, 30 hertz or something. But one thing that I've found that is just from me being in the weeds of, synth basses for so long is I have to even go through and kind of gain stage each individual note in like an 808 or like a sub bass, especially if it's something that is sample based and it's like, oh, the original sample was an A and then they shifted it to make all the different notes. Sometimes the perceived volume is different. Sometimes the like mathematical amplitude is different. So I have to always be conscious of how loud do the notes sound relative to each other, and also how much are each of them pushing the compressors.
Hmm.
How is it interacting with the other layers? Um, and it's kind of a mind fuck sometimes, especially when you have some 808s that have a pretty, intense transient to it, like a nice knock to it. But then that note is what they use to create the whole bass line. And as they stretch it, like the impact of that transient is kind of like, it's stretched out or compressed and it doesn't always hit the same. So you even have differences in the amount of the perceived like transient in different parts. So
Hmm.
I have to really keep that in mind, which is just a bit of a mind fuck. But I have a couple go-to techniques that I use to try to make sure that I'm not just wrangling the individual layers, but also making sure that they're not overtaking each other from moment to moment, depending on the particular
Yeah,
frequencies.
I know about that issue. Although I don't deal with it a lot, but when I do deal with it, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so important, and especially, in a lot of the pop adjacent electronic styles of music that I work on, like if the bottom end isn't right, nothing's right. At least like obviously if the vocals are not right, then nothing's right. But I mean like the bottom end like needs to be consistent. It needs to be intentional, and
Yeah.
that's the more that we explore down there sonically, the more likely we're gonna, step into a trap. I don't know. I just had like an Indiana Jones vision in my head there, but we have to be very careful and tread lightly to make sure we don't create more problems than we're fixing.
Yes. Amazing.
All right, so we just talked a whole lot about the things that we do to the basses individually, right? Like how we shape the tone, how we get the parts that we want, how we kind of like wrangle the bass internally. But I think it would be really good for us to switch gears and, maybe next episode we dive more into the mixing side of it and how do we get those great sounding basses to play well with the others, to play well with the drums and the vocals and the guitar and all the other elements, because I know we're going to even diverge further and further because we're working on such different stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I'm down to do that. So I guess listeners, stay tuned for next week's episode where we'll get even nerdier and dirtier with the bass.
Yeah. So we'll be back after this commercial break. That's going to last approximately 1 week.
So I think you have to say goodbye to me, though, even though I'll see you soon.
Yeah, okay. This is the formality of saying goodbye to Ben. Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl.